What's up, YouTube? It's your boy DC here. I just saw Oppenheimer for the first time last night, so I thought, why not make a tier list of all of Christopher Nolan's movies, because he is easily one of, if not my favorite director out there right now. I know, in popular opinion. But yeah, the dude just knows how to make great movies. As you can see on the tier list, the lowest it goes is C, and I don't even know if I'll put any down there. But I will say that I cannot speak on his first indie film, Following, so I'm going to put that in the haven't seen tier. I might get around to it eventually, but I just haven't seen it at this time. I will say, though, spoiler warning for all the other of his films. I probably won't go too in depth with spoilers because we'll probably be here for a couple hours if I did. But yeah, we're just going to go in release order, starting with Memento. So right off the bat, Nolan pulled no punches and made a movie with a very, very unique story structure. Essentially, the movie starts at the end, and there are two storylines. One's in black and white that's going in chronological order, and that's intercut between scenes that are basically going reverse, like there's a reverse cliffhanger and it doesn't get resolved till the next scene, so you're pretty confused, but it's pretty crazy. The two storylines end up converging at the end of the movie, but it's actually like the beginning. Yeah, it's kind of wild if you haven't seen it. And that's what I like about it, because it's a completely different viewing experience the second time. I think I've only seen this twice, but both were so different, so I'm curious to see what the third viewing will be like. I also think Guy Pearce as the lead is pretty great. He's a very unreliable narrator. You never know who to trust. And you're kind of like thrown into his shoes, so you see it from his perspective, so that was cool. I also like the actress. I'm sorry, I forget her name and her character's name, but she's in The Matrix. She's pretty good. Also, the cop, Teddy, he's played by an actor who was also in The Matrix, so it was just right around peak Matrix time, like early 2000s. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but I like the early 2000s technology in the movie, like his Polaroid camera. He takes pictures, he writes down notes of people and places, but you never know what's true or not, so it's pretty great. Even though I've only seen it twice, I'll probably have to put it in A tier. I'm definitely going to have to get around to seeing it for a third time and see if the viewing experience changes even more, but definitely starting out with a solid A tier. Okay, moving on to Insomnia, that came out in 2002. I have to admit, I've only seen this one time, and while it's not a bad movie, I just think it's a little bit forgettable, especially amongst his other films. I think I read somewhere that this was the only film he made that he didn't help write or co-write, and you can definitely tell it's lacking a bit of those like Christopher Nolan charms in the script. It's still directed very well. It's got a great cast. You got Al Pacino as the main lead, and then you've got Robin Williams as basically the antagonist. So essentially, our main character, Al Pacino, he's a detective that from LA that gets called to incident that happened in Alaska. And you know how Alaska is with its crazy weather patterns, where the sun's out 24/7 for months at a time. So he has trouble sleeping. He gets insomnia, hence the title, and he accidentally kills one of his partners. And the killer, the potential killer of the crime he's investigating, Robin Williams' character, witnesses this. He's the only one to witness it, though. So he starts calling the police station, starts making like blackmails or suggestions. And so the two try to meet up in secret to try to get a deal done. Unfortunately, I don't even remember how this story ends. I've only seen it one time, so it was kind of forgettable. So I'm kind of leaning towards the C tier, maybe, but it is directed very well. It's got a great cast, and I remember enjoying it as I was watching it, just not as memorable. So I'm gonna give it B tier, but I will say it's probably in the lower portion of B tier, probably around like B minus. Moving on to his first superhero flick, Batman Begins. So I was a little young when this came out in 2005. I was either 4 or 5, depending on when it came out in the year. So I did not see it in theaters. And funnily enough, I don't think I ever watched this until after I saw The Dark Knight. So it's kind of interesting to go back and see it then. But I have to imagine at the time this came out, Batman fans were a bit skeptical probably because the previous two Batman movies made by Joel Schumacher were complete jokes. I'm talking about Batman and Robin, Batman Forever. Batman Forever is a little bit better, but yeah, this is completely opposite in terms of tone and world building in it. Casting Christian Bale as Batman was a fantastic choice. Michael Caine as Alfred as well. They make a great duo throughout the trilogy, and all that foundation is set up in this movie. You get to learn about his relationship with Rachel. Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox is great. Even Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow as a minor villain is pretty good. But Liam Neeson playing Ra's al Ghul, he was a great villain. And actually, the first time I watched it, I was surprised he came back at the end. I thought he died earlier in the movie or something. So that was a pretty good final battle. Even though I don't come back to this too often, I actually think I rewatched The Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises more than this. But this is still pretty solid. Great origin film. I'm going to have to give it an A tier. Next up, we have The Prestige, and this is highly underrated in my opinion. It comes out right between Batman Begins and Dark Knight, so I feel like it's forgotten because of that. I actually didn't even get around to seeing it for the first time until 2020, so I kind of went in blind, not knowing much about it, but it definitely blew my expectations out of the water. So this is a time period piece. This is the first time he said one of his movies, like way back in time. I think this is like late 1800s. It follows the story of two magicians in London who were once friends helping each other, but one of them, played by Christian Bale, his character accidentally ties like a loose knot when the other character, Hugh Jackman's wife, is in one of those water tank magic tricks, and so she dies, she drowns, and so then they start hating each other. Hugh Jackman never forgives him. They start a bitter rivalry. Hugh Jackman wants his revenge. Eventually, he witnesses Bale's character perform the greatest magic trick he's ever seen, which is basically he starts at one closet door, but then appears at the other one almost instantaneously. It's like teleportation or something, he thinks. So he visits the greatest scientist of the time, Nikola Tesla, to build him a device that can make him do that, and it ends up becoming a cloning device. So he comes back to London. He performs a show in the hopes to get Christian Bale there. He figures out that when someone's cloned, he has to kill the clone immediately, basically. So he keeps drowning them underneath the stage. And so he frames Christian Bale's character for that. So he gets tried for murder. But one thing, and I kind of feel stupid for not realizing this the first time I watched it, is that Christian Bale had a twin brother the entire time. Like, it is so obvious when you find that out towards the end, that the second time I watched it, like, I was watching it through a completely different lens, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so obvious. So because of that, the writing's not quite as good as something like Memento, but it's still a very enjoyable watch, and I'm going to give it an A tier. Next up, Dark Knight. S tier, straight to S tier, you already know. It's arguably the best superhero movie of our generation, pretty much of all time. The only two that really come close are Infinity War and Endgame, in my opinion. But even so, this is still probably my favorite. I've watched it so many times that I could literally recite like every line of dialogue from it word for word, and my family would probably be really annoyed with me if I did that. But there are so many banger scenes in here, like the opening clown bank heist, the whole street chase through Chicago, well, Gotham, but it was filmed in Chicago, with, the hit me scene. That was pretty iconic. The ferry scene at the end is great. I could go on and on. Heath Ledger's Joker is still the best version of Joker I've ever seen. Still my favorite in my opinion. So yeah, it's an easy S tier. It might be my favorite Nolan film of all time, but arguably one of my favorite movies of all time too. So man, Inception. Nolan really dropped two of my favorite movies of all time back to back within 2 years. This is going straight to S tier again. I always alternate between these two as which is my favorite, but they're always top two. Leonardo DiCaprio, love him or hate him, he's one of the best actors of our generation, of his generation. He should have won an Oscar a lot sooner than he did, arguably. He could have won one for this. He was the main character. He did a great job. His character is pretty complex. This was the first movie I recall seeing at the ripe young age of 10 or 11 that really made me think about it a lot after I'd seen it. So much so, I had to rewatch it multiple times to fully grasp it. And I think to this day, my parents still don't understand it, despite how many times we see it. Like, I always try to rewatch it at least once a year. But just the concept of going into people's dreams is so fascinating. Now, I realize that a lot of the movie's dialogue is exposition, trying to explain that whole concept, and it gets pretty deep. But I'm invested and interested the whole time. And when the whole Inception sequence starts, where they go to different layers of dreams within dreams, it's just a roller coaster the whole time. The action is top tier. I would say the actual dream levels could have gotten a bit more creative, kind of like how they did in the training sequences with Ariadne, but still, that's more of a nitpick. The relationship between Cobb, who's Leo's character, and his wife Mal, is pretty devastating, and the score, oh my god, this score. I haven't even mentioned the score yet, but Hans Zimmer, in other movies of his, he's fantastic as always. And the ending with his song Time, goes into that, the spinning dreidel at the end. That ending gives me goosebumps every time. So yeah, 10 out of 10, S tier movie, hands down. Next up, The Dark Knight Rises. So, I remember the hype for this movie at the time, way back in 2012, was off the charts. It's kind of like, if you could imagine the hype for Endgame after Infinity War, it was kind of that level back then, because The Dark Knight came out way back in 2008. He took a break, made Inception, I don't know if you've heard of it, in 2010, so there was a 4-year gap between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, so the hype was off the charts. And honestly, making Inception probably added to the hype just because it boosted Nolan's reputation as an elite filmmaker. So yeah, Going into this movie, expectations were super high, and I can see why a lot of people's were disappointed. But honestly, I was pretty satisfied after watching this. It's one of the movies I rewatch. Like I said earlier, I always rewatch The Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. I hardly ever go back to Batman Begins for some reason. Even though that might be a better movie technically, like this does have a bunch of loopholes in the plot. Like there were some dumb things in here. Specifically, I'm thinking of when literally all the cops of Gotham get trapped underground. Like, and so the only people left are Gordon and Robin. That was kind of dumb, just for the plot to happen. But other than, I mean, those are just nitpicks. I think another complaint people have is the fact that there isn't that much Batman action in this. Like overall, Bruce Wayne, he starts as a hermit in the movie. He gets back into it, but then he gets beaten by Bane, and so he's sent to that prison. So he's kind of out of the action for a while. When he comes back, it's kind of brief, but it is pretty epic. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but like the whole scale of this movie feels very grand and epic, like a fitting finale to the trilogy. So I enjoy that. Fun fact: like during one of those scenes, one of the iconic scenes I'm talking about is when Bruce Wayne, he has to climb out of that prison without a rope, and that score, that song keeps going on. That gives me chills every time. And my friend and I, we always thought they were singing, "This place, awesome, awesome. This place, awesome, awesome." So that's something I always remember when I watch it. But yeah, overall, it's a fun time. It's a fitting conclusion. It might not have met everyone's expectations, but I was pretty satisfied when I watched it. So I'm going to give it an A tier right above Batman Begins. Next up, we've got Interstellar. Now, when I asked you guys a couple weeks ago on a poll, most of you said that Interstellar is your favorite Christopher Nolan film, and I don't blame you at all there. It's another banger. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off right here. It's going straight to S tier. This is a top 3 Nolan film for me. I gotta say, it's probably his most emotional film, at least character-wise. When you think about the relationship between the father and daughter at the center of this movie, it's fantastic. This movie has all the spectacles, some of the best shots of any of his movies. Shout out to his cinematographer. It has the otherworldly, pun intended, concepts with the space-time and time dilation. And I'm a sucker for space movies in general, so it probably appeals to me really easily. The story does take a long time to develop. It's kind of a slow burn at first, but once you finally start to get to outer space, it's just nonstop the whole time. I love the different world designs, you know, the water world with the humongous waves, the ice world, and the best scene for me, in my opinion, is when Matt Damon tries to take over that large ship. He gets blown up, and then Cooper has to match the rotation of the ship and dock it, and has that iconic song playing. It's just goosebumps the whole time. But yeah, I could see the flaws in it though, like when he goes into the black hole and is in the fifth dimension bookshelf, kind of gets a little wacky at the end, but it doesn't take that much away from the movie. Like, it was kind of going to be hard to wrap up anyway, and I can see past that, so it's still an S tier for me. And yeah, I'd probably put it third right behind these two. Next up, we've got Dunkirk, and it's probably becoming pretty obvious why Nolan might be my favorite director ever. He just makes the type of movies that I love. Like, he's got arguably the best superhero trilogy we've ever gotten. He's got the sci-fi, mind-bending stuff. And then he goes and makes a World War II epic, and I gotta admit, I'm kind of a history nerd. Like, I'm a sucker for anything World War II related. I know it was the bloodiest conflict in history, and a ton of people died, but I just find it really fascinating and learning about it. So I was super hyped for this to come out. And I was even more intrigued because being an American, we didn't learn too much about the Battle of Dunkirk, so I didn't know much about it going in. But yeah, I was just really intrigued by that. Now, the main argument I see against this movie is that it's emotionally deprived. Like, there's not much character moments in this film. There's actually not that much dialogue at all if I think about it. I don't even know the main character's name. I don't know if they ever even mention the main character's name. There's a lot of kind of like randoms in here. Tom Hardy gives a good performance as the fighter pilot, but I really don't mind because even Nolan himself said this movie's more about the events of Dunkirk that took place, not really about the people, but focus more on like the spectacle of the events. And this movie is tense pretty much the entire time. It's really cool how he intercut like 3 different timelines that took place. So you've got like 1 week spent at the mole, 1 day at the sea, and then only 1 hour in the sky, and all of them just kind of work together. It's kind of crazy. I remember the first time I watched it, I was a little confused, but the second time you kind of pick out different pieces, and so you kind of see how they tie together, which is really cool. And the action is fantastic. I love all the shots in the sky with the planes flying, above the vast ocean. It just looks beautiful to me. It's really enjoyable. It actually breezes by too. I think it's the shortest film if you don't include following. Like I think this is even under 2 hours. So it breezes by and it's a great time. So once again, I'm gonna have to give him another A tier. I would probably, honestly, for me personally, I think I enjoy it even more than Memento. So I'm gonna put it top of A tier. Now we're getting down to the wire here. We've only got 2 films left. First one came out during peak pandemic times in 2020, and I actually got to see it in theaters twice. I was committed back then. Now, if you thought Inception was confusing, then you're in for a treat with Tenet because it is like that on steroids. It's definitely Nolan's most ambitious film, at least concept-wise, and he tackles time travel with a very unique approach that I've never seen before. I will admit the fact that it's pretty hard to understand makes it so it's not a movie for everyone. Even though I've seen it probably 4 to 5 times, I don't think I fully grasp it yet. Like, it is that confusing, but it's still really fun to watch in my opinion. This is also probably the only movie I'll ever watch with subtitles on because the audio mixing is terrible. Not the score itself. It's really well done again, but the level of volume between the dialogue and all the sound effects in the score is really bad. Like, you can barely hear what they're saying, so I always watch it with subtitles on, so that's a tip from me. You've probably heard it everywhere else, though. I forgot to mention that David Washington and Robert Pattinson as the 2 main leads are great, and they make a wonderful duo. I just realized at this time it's kind of hard. I've been having trouble remembering main characters' names in these movies other than a select few, because that is one of the tropes against Christopher Nolan, is that he doesn't make his characters too memorable sometimes, but nonetheless, I still enjoy the performances, and I'm pretty sure the main character here is literally just called the protagonist. But yeah, they both him, David Washington, and Robert Pattinson make a great duo in this. And even I looked up her name, Elizabeth Debicki as Kat, as like that third lead character. She did a great job. And then Kenneth Branagh as the Russian villain. He was pretty scary and evil at times, which I'm sure was a blast to play. So even though I have my gripes here and there, I still think this is a very entertaining film and really fun. And I'm really grateful to have another very intellectual blockbuster because we don't get those that often. So I do not care. I'm giving it an A tier. And we finally made it to his latest film, a historical biopic about one of the most complex, interesting mans alive, also known as the father of the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer. Let me just say right off the bat, it's easily the movie of the year. Like, that's no question. Nothing has come close so far. Even though a lot of movies have been mid, even if they were good movies, this would probably still beat it. Like, this feels like he's trying for an Oscar here. It's that good, and if it doesn't win an Oscar, then something's wrong with the system, which we already kind of know. So unlike Dunkirk, this is a completely character-driven historical drama. There's a lot of dialogue here, and the cast is humongous, but I will say the 2 standouts for me were definitely Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer. He did a fantastic job, and Robert Downey Jr. as Louis Strauss, who is essentially Oppenheimer's arch rival later in life. I won't get too much into detail because this movie is deep. Like, it's 3 hours long, but it breezes by. So I'm definitely going to have to watch it again to get a better grasp of everything that was said because there was a lot in here. It was 3 hours long. It's constantly moving. The beginning of the movie, it constantly cuts between scenes, so it's a little bit jarring. It's a little bit choppy. But once you get into the actual Manhattan Project of beginning to assemble the team and build the bomb, it really finds its flow, finds its rhythm, and goes at a good pace. If you go in expecting it to be entirely about the bomb, you might be a little disappointed because it's more about Oppenheimer and how the whole project and aftermath affects him and his life. So that was really interesting, and I'm glad it went that way. Now, I knew a little bit about Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project before watching, but I didn't dive too deep because I wanted to be a little bit surprised when watching the movie. And I gotta say, I was intrigued and impressed with where the movie went after the bomb went off. So it essentially became a courtroom drama in the last act of the movie. Went on for a while, and I really enjoyed that. I find it riveting, and how it was him versus the government, how the government didn't really trust him because of his communist ties, and how they were in the arms race against the Russians at the height of the Cold War with nuclear warheads. So that was really interesting. There were also some really haunting scenes, almost horror movie-like, that I won't spoil here, but they involved, the Japan bombings at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and his character and how he was affected by that. There were so many great scenes and moments in here I'm still digesting. Definitely going to be seeing it again. I'm going to have to give it another S tier. It would probably be 4th on my ranking right now. So yeah, if you look at this is probably the order I would rank these in. Yeah, overall, fantastic director. I'm so grateful we have guys like this today because these type of movies are very few and far between, especially with all the forgettable movies being made these days, especially live action remakes Disney. But yeah, I'd love to know how you would rate his movies down in the comments below. So I'll meet you down there. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.